Good evening and welcome again. So in this lecture we will be going back into the BP example and we will be doing a little more debugging. And the reason I say a little more debugging is I didn't really mention it previously, but what we're doing with the print string is in fact one of the ways that we can debug in our code or in our blueprints. So for example, if we were midway through making the player blueprint and something wasn't colliding or doing what we had expected, what we can do is, one of the ways that we would debug is that we can set a print string. So if we were expecting it to be hitting something called projectile, we can do a check against what the thing it's hit is called, and if that came back as floor, for example, we would know that's why something else wasn't being triggered, is because it's expecting a projectile and it's hitting a floor. So in the same way that we're printing out the word I'm a coin, or the words I'm a coin, we could print out the word of the name of the object that you're being collided with. So remembering the print string function is very, very handy for debugging, remembering how to use it, because we could be taking, as I said, we could be taking the assumption that it's hitting the right thing, and it could actually be hitting something else or finding the name of something else, which just brings us that step closer to realizing what the problem is. And that's the whole concept behind debugging. That is exactly what we're aiming to do, is to slowly piece together where something's gone wrong. So the other way that we can debug, which is the more literal way of debugging, is adding a debug node to our blueprints. To do this, all we need to do is find one of the nodes that we're interested in finding the value on. So let's say this print string to begin with, and we press F9 on it. When you've pressed F9, what that does is toggles a debug node. You can also right click it and you can see here toggle breakpoint, sorry, not debug node, toggle breakpoint. You can remove breakpoint and you can disable breakpoint. But we now have our breakpoint here. And what a breakpoint will do is when the blueprint calls this function, it will break into the blueprint and it will allow you to start reading and checking some of the variables in the blueprint. So to demonstrate this, if we press play, event tick, as I said, is called every frame. So this will be called immediately. And what this allows us to do now is we are in our debug mode basically. So this line shows us what's currently being called. So event tick is currently calling print string. And we can start highlighting things. So if we highlight the entry node here, we can see that it is of type string and it knows that the current value is I'm a coin, as if we were to highlight it down here as well. And then the next thing it will do is call the set coin node. So to see this in action, all we need to do is up here we can step into, which will take us to the next point in the blueprint. So what we can now check is that coin is currently 0, and this is exactly as I explained earlier. So we're taking a value of 0, so we know coin is 0 plus 1, and this will give you the outcome of that equation. So 0 plus 1 is 1, so current value will equal 1. And now that still says 0 because that hasn't got there yet. This has only just reached this node. So we need to step into this one more time. So now that it's got past that node, you'll see that the current value is now 1, where it was 0 previously, which means the value coming out of here will be 1. That's converting it to a string, so we can see that the string value is now the text version of 1. So that's no longer the numerical one. We couldn't use that in a maths equation again, because that is now just text. And then the value that will be printed to the screen is the text value 1. So then if we step into that again, there's nothing else after that, so that is our first breakpoint kind of over. So it's now going back to that breakpoint. For as long as that breakpoint there, it's going to keep breaking into this. So then we can step into it again. We'll have the current value of 1, because remember that's now been stored in the integer value variable of count. The current value we're expecting now is 2, because we have 1 plus 1 is 2. The string value at the moment will still be 1 because again we haven't got past this node, which is the important bit right now. But then when we have, the current value will now be 2, the integer value is 2, and then the text value coming out will be 2. And this will just keep looping. Obviously this time we'd expect 3 and so on. So that's how you can break into the event tick. But we're obviously now in an endless loop where we can't leave because the event tick will keep running forever, and that breakpoint is there. So if we press F9, we can remove the breakpoint. And then if we step into it again, and step into it again, or in fact if we just press resume, we can just resume the game and we can see our text. Okay, nice and simple. And you can do this in various places as well. So if we remove this, the great thing about this is that we can just swap this out with the event begin play. So the event begin play will only fire once. So what we would expect now is if we compile this and play, there we go, we just get the text appear once, which means if we add the breakpoint back to the print string, we'll come into it once, we can step through, we can see all of the same values happening. So it will start as 0, it's added the 1, we've got past that, so its value is now 1. It's printing the value 1 to the screen. We can step into that, and now because the event begin play only fires once, we're not going to enter back into that breakpoint, so we're now free of the breakpoints. But that has allowed us to again debug through what's happening. So the way that I have planned the rest of this course is it's fairly inevitable that even though I have a lot of this set up and already tested, something will probably go wrong at some point. That's just programming. And what I intend to do is whenever I do make a mistake, I will leave that in the course material and I will debug through the process of fixing it. Partly because that way if you encounter exactly the same problem, then you will know how to fix it. And even if you don't have that problem yourself, I think that learning how to debug properly really does improve your programming skills. It gives you a wider understanding of exactly what's happening. So I will leave those in, so don't be surprised if you see me trying something every now and again and it breaking and then us going through a debugging process. I've left all of those in, well, I assume that this is going to happen and I intend to leave them in as a learning process for us. Further to that as well, I also think, especially for newer programmers, if anything doesn't make sense, so I'll try and explain things as much as I can as I go through, but if you're left at the end of a function thinking I have no idea why that works, it does work and the results are as I expect, but I don't know how we're getting there, then stick a breakpoint in and just read through, just step into every section of that functionality and see what is happening to each variable at each stage. And what you'll find is by the end of doing that, you would have seen a step-by-step change in the functionality, and hopefully that will start to get the process to make sense to you. And it's another really good way, again, it's just to drive home really that it's a really good way to learn. So do feel free to come to the discussion sections and ask questions if you get really stuck or if you are completely confused by something that I've run through. But I would definitely say that as well as just asking questions, debugging through things and breaking through different sections of code is a really good way to learn things, and it definitely makes concepts and the process of programming stick in your mind a bit better than just asking and getting the answer back. So that's another really good way to use debugging, and it's definitely one of the ways that I've found a useful and powerful way to learn. So I'm going to leave that there for now. I don't think that debugging through simple numbers is going to be of any more use to us for now. So what we can do just to clean up is if we close that and make sure that you've deleted the example that we added in the scene. And again, just to reiterate that the actor needs to be in the scene for it to do something. So now that I've removed it from the level, it doesn't do anything. If I put it back in, we'll get our code firing off again. So that's why we added it there. And then, so yeah, just make sure that you've deleted the BP example from the level, and then delete it from the hierarchy as well. And just tell it to force delete if you get that question coming up saying it's being used somewhere. And that will just help us keep the project folders a bit tidier. So that is our introduction to blueprints section done. I think that we now have a base understanding of what blueprints are, what variables are, and how we're going to be using them as we go forward, which means we can start getting into the meatier parts of the blueprints, which I think is going to be a lot more fun. So hopefully you're looking forward to that, and I will see you in the next lecture.